Hey everybody, QuestWise here, and today I want to talk about inspiration for games, for tabletop role-playing games in general. But I've been reading a lot lately. I read a lot anyway, only because if you don't know this about me, I am a bookseller by trade. That's my profession. I'm constantly being inundated with new things to read. I am the curator of science fiction, fantasy, and games at a small independent bookstore in the town in which I live, and thus I get a lot of access and I read a lot of stuff within the vein of science fiction and fantasy and mythology and gaming and that kind of stuff. But I read a few things lately, and it made me really think about how after I got done reading these things, I was like really excited to get back to the drawing table when it comes to tabletop role playing games, because I wanted to incorporate a bunch of these ideas that I had read about. And so I realized that there's inspiration really out there everywhere. And I've had a few conversations with people online who talk about things like writer's block or game master block, where you just kind of feel like you run out of ideas. And for that, I would say the cure for that kind of thing is to read. Read everything. Read anything. Whether it be the newspaper, it be a novel, it be nonfiction. Watch a movie, a TV show. One of the coolest things, tests techniques that I learned a few years back was that to sit down and watch a sitcom, to just watch a 30-minute sitcom, and then at the end of that, try to figure out how it is that the writers of that sitcom incorporated an entire storyline within those 30 minutes, or an hour, or whatever it happens to be, just a TV show, and figure out how it is that they incorporated the story that they wanted to tell, whether that continues on to another episode later, but what was the story that was contained within that half an hour to an hour block. And I've used that a lot of times when I need inspiration for a role-playing game, is that I will sit down and I'll watch a TV show and I'll go, okay, what was it within that half an hour, that hour, that the writers are trying to sort of convey as their story kind of thing. And how can I do that at a table? How can I take an idea that I have and can I convey it to a bunch of players within an hour to 2 hours, maybe a 3-hour session? And that's really helped me sort of like encapsulate my ideas a little bit better and put them onto paper and make them into a session-long event that is not too short and it's not too long, and it fits perfectly. And it does take some practice, but it's a fun practice to do. So I would encourage everybody to try that out at least once or twice. One of the other things I wanted to talk about today is that I've been watching a few movies with my wife, and I've just finished reading a few other things as well too. And the ideas and inspiration are really, really cranking in my head right now. And I wanted to share some of those with you to kind of show you what I'm talking about when I'm saying that inspiration can be everywhere. And so you want to take clues from everything that you can to build yourself a better game. Don't be afraid to borrow ideas. A lot of players that I've talked to, a lot of game masters, especially new ones, have been said that they want something very, very unique, and that they work very hard at trying to find a very unique idea to bring to the table, and then they get frustrated because they can't think of anything that's not been done before. There's a great quote out there that says that everything that's ever been everything's already been ever written about. Like, there's no new stories out there. So don't be afraid to borrow from other sources. Don't be afraid to take ideas from one source, make them your own, give them your own kind of spin to it, and then bring it to your tabletop. In role-playing games, unless you're actually publishing your own stuff, you don't have to worry about being copyright infringement when you're bringing it to just a table of players. You can take those ideas, put your own kind of spin on them, and then unleash them onto the players. So don't be afraid to do that kind of stuff, to take an idea and sort of put your own spin on it. One of the books that I just finished reading, a novella to be fair, is called Binti. This is a short science fiction novella. It's part of one of 3. This is currently out, but I believe as of Tuesday there will be the collected edition of all 3 novellas into one omnibus, as it were. But Binti is about a girl, and I want you to go out and read this. It's just really cheap, but it's about a girl who of African heritage in the future, who's left her family sort of business to go and join this university and runs into troubles that way. one of the ideas that I want to borrow from this story is the concept of knowing your enemy. And that's one of the concepts that pops up in this book, is that she's confronted by an enemy, and once she's able to sort of understand them, once she's able to sort of interact with them, she realizes that they're not inherently evil, that they're not inherently bad, that what they're doing, they believe is sort of justified in the actions that they're taking. And thus she begins to know her enemy, she begins to understand them, and that becomes sort of the main driving factor of the book, and how this particular story sort of plays itself out. So that's one of the ideas I want to do there. Is I want to bring to the table an idea of that my players are sort of they're interacting with an enemy, that they at some point they come up against some adversity, but I want them in some way to sort of get to know their enemy. What are the motivations behind their enemies? If you want to see a cool video I did a while back, go back in the catalog and check out the one. It was for Vigilante Hack, Vigilante City, but it was about villain motivations, in which I talk about how the best villains in a game or in a book or in a story, however you want to play it out, are villains that have motivations that they believe themselves, motivations that are things that drive them forward, that give them a reason to be a bad guy, all right? And in their minds, what they think they are doing is right. And if you want to see that done very, very well, any of the Marvel movies that are currently out are perfect for that kind of thing. And the writers and the directors of any of the Marvel movies, whether it be Avengers or any of the others, they are very, very good. And the writers of the comics and stuff as well too, where they get their inspiration, are amazing at creating enemies that have very passionate motivations. So for instance, one of my all-time favorite villains of the Marvel Universe is Magneto. He has this intense motivation to be who he is, and to have the sort of concepts and ideas that he is pushing forward with, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and the idea that mutants are a higher life form than just regular humans. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go check out, read anything about Magneto. Go and watch the X-Men movies. He's one of the coolest and strongest, most passionate motivations, I believe, out of any villain in the Marvel Universe. Always been one of my favorites. So with that, I want to use the idea, the concept from Binti of getting the players to know their enemies' motivations, and maybe using that against them, or maybe even just stopping the conflict by getting to understand what it is that the villains are doing, what's their motivation for attacking this town or the city or whatever it happens to be, or the enemies themselves. And sometimes villains, sometimes enemies, sometimes monsters just don't have motivations. They're just there to kill. For instance, a gelatinous cube in D&D, it's just there to exist. Like it just, it sweeps through these dungeons and sort of cleans the place out. It doesn't really have an evil motivation. So therefore, you can't really sort of use the motivation against the enemy. But, the leader of an evil army, a general of a hobgoblin army, might have some sort of passionate motivation that's driving him forward. So it'll make a cool sort of twist on the game as well, too. One of the other ones, I talked about this as well, too. I did a review of this comic. It's called Die. It's put up by Image Comics. This is a great, very dark look at role-playing games. And again, that sort of visitation fiction of traveling from one world to the other. And you can see my review back in the catalog of this as well, too. But I want to use the idea, I've always loved the visitation fiction idea. And the being away from home thing is the thing I want to capture from this comic. The idea that maybe not necessarily you're in a brand new world, but you're in a different part of the world that you've never been before. And what does that mean to your character as a background-wise? Where do they come from, and what are they leaving behind when they go on this grand adventure? And weave that into part of the story. Let the character grow organically through the idea that maybe they left their family behind, and now they're really missing them, and they're really worried about them. Maybe your campaign is set in a place where a war is beginning to break out, and your characters are going to try to stop that war, but inadvertently, by doing so, being gone from your homeland, that leaves them open for attack and for danger and stuff as well, too. So the idea of sort of being away from home, of being away from the place of everything that you value, I want to feed into a game as well too. Um, I just finished watching Ant-Man and Wasp with my wife, and uh, one of the concepts I grew from that was that um, there's always a bigger fish, right? There's always going to be um, a, a villain that you can't seem to overcome by simply bashing the door down and hacking and slashing. That you have to sort of come up with a plan. And in Ant-Man and Wasp, and again, no spoilers for this kind of stuff, but the idea of misdirection was the idea that I could have grabbed from this movie that I want to try to incorporate into my games, either as a player or as a game master. Try to get those ideas in that you're confronted by an enemy that you cannot attack head on, that you must find a way to sort of divert their attention so that you can do something effective, or to divert their attention so that you can bypass them in some sort of way. So the idea of misdirection, of sort of tricking an enemy either into not fighting or finding a way, buying time to find a way to defeat them. Again, inspiration can come from any source. Don't be afraid to dive into things like mythology. I highly recommend Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. This is fairly new. This is still a bestseller book out there as well too. This is Neil Gaiman's sort of take on the Norse mythology stories. If you've read them before, you'll be very familiar with the stories that are contained in here. But one of the great things is I read some of these stories and I want to use the ideas for myself. I want to take those ideas, those stories, and I want to sort of deconstruct them and put my own sort of spin on them, and then use them in the players. The idea of the quest in these with the Norse tales, as well as, and if you've never read some Joseph Campbell, I highly recommend that you go out there and you pick up Hero with a Thousand Faces. There's also the Romance of the, I believe it's called The Romance of the Grail. What Joseph Campbell does very well, and he's a mythologist, is he studies mythologies from across all different time periods and all different cultures, and he finds the commonality between each one of those. And this one specifically, the archetypes of that heroes have not changed throughout history, throughout different cultures. All those key stories are always found. Those archetypes are found in every culture and every part of history. And by reading this book, you kind of see how that kind of falls in the line. One of the best examples is Star Wars. It's no secret that George Lucas actually read this book and used the archetypal ideas from Joseph Campbell to build his Star Wars story. So you have the wandering wise man in Obi-Wan Kenobi. You have the naive youth in Luke Skywalker. You have the humorous sidekicks in C-3PO and R2-D2. You have the rogue, roguish character in Han Solo. You have the strong and powerful sort of female character, as well as leader in Princess Leia. So there's all these archetypes that are found through millennia, through history, and through different cultures, are all sort of encapsulated in Star Wars and stuff too. So don't be afraid to build a villain as a game master using one of these archetypes and sort of building out from there. Don't be afraid to grab a mythological story, be it from the Iliad in Greek mythology, or be like an idea of Ragnarok from Norse mythology and stuff, and rewrite them, or just put your own spin on those things and bring them to your game. The idea of the quest, and I'm going to share a little secret because I've had this question pop up a few times as well too. Where does the name Questwise come from? And it really is sort of born out of this idea of seeking other sources. So Questwise comes from two different sources. First of all, the Wise's idea, which is something that comes out of Burning Wheel, the Burning Wheel RPG, in which some of the skills are just called Wises, and it's a broad category of being sort of like, I'm horse wise, so I know all things about horses. I've spent my whole life around them, and thus I know every sort of little detail about maybe grooming them, about raising them, about putting saddles on them, about breaking them, those kind of things. So it's a wise thing. So in the idea of Questwise is that I have this broad knowledge of quests, of the games, and I try to bring those ideas and share those ideas with you as well too. But also wise as a direction, as in Questwise being going on a quest. And that's one of the things I always try to incorporate into my games, is that the idea of that draw of a quest, of drawing you away from your homeland, of drawing you away from those things that you find familiar, and finding yourself in new situations all the time as characters. Because I think that's, as people, that's how we grow, right? In the real world, it's by facing things that we don't understand that helps us learn and helps us grow as people. And thus, you can also feel that at the game table as well, too, when your players are encountering situations that they've never encountered before. Or if they're encountering situations that they're familiar with, but have a very different take on them. Thus, they begin to learn, and they can use the knowledge of things that they've done before, other quests that they've been on, in order to sort of overcome the obstacles that they're faced with at that current time. I hope this video was helpful. It was very fun to make. I encourage you to go out and check out all of the stuff that I've talked about today. If you have any other games that are books or movies or anything that you're watching currently right now that you feel has been impacting your game and the way that you play, please post them in the notes down below. I'd love to have a discussion about this and share these ideas with a much wider audience as well too. So until next time, I'm Questwise, and I'm out.